Okay. So quick background on me. My name is Niklas. Was part of the founding team of MakerDAO, and kind of taking a look back to 2016, 2017, right, when DeFi was still in its infancy, right? It all started very small, right? So at first it's like, well, there's going to be this kind of parallel financial system, and we're going to need to be able to exchange value. And crypto is volatile, right? And so we're going to need some stable means of exchange, right? And so, okay, stablecoin is kind of primitive number one to creating a DeFi ecosystem, right? But in trying to do so, there was an enormous amount of other things that had to be built out first, right? So, well, we will need a means to kind of exchange these assets in a decentralized way. So we created the first DEX on Ethereum. Actually, I don't think many people know that. Maker actually created the first DEX on Ethereum before Ether Delta, before any of this stuff. And then you get to kind of the next step, and it's like, oh, well, like in order to have this stablecoin that's backed by Ethereum, right, you need to know what is the price of Ethereum, right? So, okay, you're going to need an oracle. So Maker made the first oracles on Ethereum. And then, right, it's like, well, you know, I wish I could like debug my code without just deploying my contract on chain, seeing it out of gas error, and still having no idea why my function failed, right? So, okay, so I make the first like Solidity debugger. And so fast forward a few years, right? We've kind of released DAI, and it's exclusively backed by Ethereum, right? The most decentralized collateral, and we run into the first problem. And what is the first problem? Well, there is only so much on-chain activity. There's only so many people actually using ETH on-chain. There are only so many people willing to take risk in DeFi and actually utilize their ETH instead of having it just safely sit in a wallet. And so we hit kind of this level of like 80 million Psi, which was the name for single collateral DAI. And it looks like we've just topped out, right? There's no growth left. And it's like, well, this kind of sucks. How do we fix this? And so the solution was, oh, well, clearly we just need a stablecoin 2.0, right? We need a multi-collateral DAI. We need to expand what DAI is backed by more than just ETH, right? It should be backed by other altcoins, right? It should be backed by things like Bitcoin. It should be backed by stocks, by bonds, by commodities, right? And this way, right, it wasn't just a way to open a means for growth, right? But it was also a way to diversify the collateral portfolio to help stabilize, right, and de-risk the peg breaking for the DAI stablecoin. But okay, so you release multi-collateral DAI, and what happens, right? You start onboarding a bunch of altcoins, right? And you quickly find that you run into problem number two. Compared to, you know, outside of ETH or something like wrapped-BTC, there's really not that much total addressable market if you start combining all of the altcoins that can be safely utilized as backing for a stablecoin, right? So the growth opportunities were quite slim. And so you're back at problem number one, right? Like, is this it? Is this the biggest that this thing can grow, right? And all the while, you're going through these cycles. And what are these cycles? Well, the cycles are when you get some kind of euphoria, right, and number goes up, and it just kind of has this positive feedback loop, right? So Maker kind of benefited from this at times, right? Number goes up. People want to get leverage, so they lock up their ETH, they borrow against their ETH, they buy more ETH, right? And Maker gets to set really high interest rates because people are just that bullish on number go up. And that's the positive side of the equation. But actually, like DeFi has this problem, right, in that it's hyper-reflexive. So actually, what happens when number goes up, stops, and number goes down starts? Well, when number goes down starts, nobody wants to have long exposure on ETH or crypto in general. And nobody wants to have, especially nobody wants to have leveraged exposure. And if they do, they don't want to pay very high interest rates, right? So you get into this kind of depression, right? And so at first glance, right, it's just like, oh, big deal, right? Revenue goes up, revenue goes down, who cares? But I kind of want to like give you kind of the second order thinking here, which is that organizations, right, like all of the DeFi institutions, like Aave, like MakerDAO, like Curve, like Uniswap, right, they're all part of this hyper-reflexive cycle. And so when, excuse me, so when times are good, you're making hundreds of millions of revenue, right? Great. You do a bunch of hiring, right? You're starting to expand your product suite, right? And then when times are bad, you have to lay everybody off, right? You have to do cost cutting. The future is uncertain, right? Regulatory fears, right? And this is not a very enviable position, right? And so this is what I kind of call the DeFi boom bust cycle. And so I want to talk a little bit about how Maker has kind of has been trying to solve this, right? And so the way that Maker kind of tackled this was to say, okay, well, all of crypto is hyper-correlated, and if you stick with crypto, right, you're always going to be subject to this roller coaster ride of acceleration and dampening. However, if you start using real-world assets, right, which is a non-correlated asset class, right, you can diversify that revenue stream and start to smoothen out that curve. And so in, I would say, late 2022, Maker started aggressively reallocating into real-world assets. In particular, T-bills were quite attractive, right, due to very favorable monetary policy that was happening around the world. And so here's a graph of kind of Maker's crypto revenue. You can see on the bottom it totals 155 million across all the different on-chain collateral types. I think today, actually, that number is at 200 million. And then here is Maker's real-world asset revenue. So these come from treasury bills. These come from lending for US mortgages. These come from, I think, a variety of things. I think there was even a way of extending credit to the contractors that were building like Tesla collision repair facilities in some credit tenant like loss swaps. And this number is also today around 100 million, right? And so you have this very nice like revenue distribution, right? Here, where you can see, like in blue, right, of all of the crypto-backed revenue, and in yellow, right, all of the real-world asset-backed revenue, right? And so you say, okay, like, problem solved, right? Like, we've solved the boom-bust cycle, like, pack it up, boys, and everyone just start doing this. Well, not quite. So the really big problem here is that real-world assets are not crypto native. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you have something like ETH, right, it's entirely encompassed on-chain, right? It can be encumbered on-chain, right? You can view all of the related data on-chain. It's completely custodied, on-chain. With real-world assets, this is it's the complete opposite, right? And so the challenge here is, how do you make real-world assets crypto native, right? Or how do you emulate these crypto native properties such that they become easier and safer to integrate across DeFi. And so while there are certainly more, I think there's kind of 4 main categories here of metadata that is important to either utilize or at least be aware of if you're not utilizing it. What risks you are exposed to when integrating real-world assets. So those are custody, liquidity, yield, and counterparty risk. And so I kind of want to go into each of these a little bit. So let's start with custody, right? When you have a real-world asset on chain, typically this is not the actual asset that you have, right? It's a representation of the asset in the real world. And so that asset needs to be custodied somewhere, right? And so you're going to need some metadata stream showing from the custody provider, right, that, okay, these assets are actually in custody, and so this on-chain representation, right, can actually be treated as this asset, right, because the underlying assets actually exist, right? And there are, this is a non-trivial problem, right, because, okay, let's say that there is a corporation just holding these things, or there is some SPV. Well, okay, who are you trusting to get this data from and to bring this data on chain, right? To then completely trust that data is correct, right? Now liquidity, right? With crypto native assets, right, when, say, the price goes down, right, you can liquidate them on chain. And there is liquidity available on chain either via DEXs or via an army of market maker bots or MEV bots that will happily scoop up vast quantities of collateral at a discount. With RWAs, you don't have this, right? Now, you either, with certain real-world assets, right, they may just be very liquid in general, and there may not actually be liquid markets for this stuff, right? Or, in the case of T-bills, right, it's one of the most liquid markets in the world, but the liquidity is not on-chain, right? So you cannot do on-chain liquidations, and so there's a whole mechanism, right, through which of signaling of back and forth to the real world of how to liquidate this kind of stuff. And as a DeFi protocol, right, you need to be aware of this because you don't have those same guarantees. Furthermore, you have all kinds of counterparty risk, right? When you have assets in some kind of SPV, right, or even in some kind of bank, right? What happens if either through corporate greed or maliciousness, or let's say through regulatory action, right? These assets get frozen. Well, all of a sudden you have this on-chain token that you thought was backed by the underlying asset, and now it's not actually there anymore, right? Or you did some kind of sale through some kind of broker, and this shouldn't happen, but the broker just rugged you, right? Or you have some kind of FTX or Alameda situation, right? So that could take go into bankruptcy proceedings that could take years to unwind, right? So when you're integrating an RWA, right, you need to consider this failure scenario that this can happen, right, and that there will be a multi-year process, right. And to give you an idea, right, the FTX situation still hasn't resolved, right. That's still in bankruptcy proceedings. Mt. Gox still hasn't resolved. That's still in bankruptcy proceedings, right. And how many years has that been? And last is yield, right. And so this is this one is a little more interesting, right. And so I think I think you can make DeFi protocols much more smart with their kind of capital allocation strategies, right? And you kind of see the the beginnings of this, right, with DAOs just kind of doing treasury management, right? Like, oh, let me diversify my treasury, or we see a yield opportunity here, let's put some capital over here, right? But this is all done in a manual way, right? And so the automation side of this is extremely important. And what you can kind of do here, right, is, okay, well, if the protocol is aware through like an oracle that the yield is high here and low in this RWA opportunity here, the protocol can automatically reallocate capital from bucket A to bucket B, right? Let's say the protocol wants to have a certain geographic distribution of risk of where assets are custodied, right? It can say, oh, we have too much exposure in the US. Let's move some capital from this US exposure RWA bucket over here to this one in Singapore, or this one in London, or this one in Dubai, right? And so kind of wrapping up here, I think that the opportunity here is extremely large, right? To not just expand revenue, but really smoothen it out. But there is all kinds of infrastructure that we need to build, and it's primarily going to be powered by oracles. And so oracles are going to be getting much more advanced and much more utilized really as an interoperability layer between traditional finance and decentralized finance. So that's it for me today. I want to thank you all for coming. Quick shout out, I'm the founder of Chronicle. Chronicle is an Oracle protocol. We currently are the second largest Oracle protocol by value secured, securing just under $10 billion in TVL. If that's interesting to you, or if you need oracles, please come talk to me, or please follow us on our socials. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We might have time for one question. Right? Yeah. Okay. Just one second. Sorry.
What ledgers and protocols are you currently integrated with?
In terms of which chains?
Yeah, which chains and which apps?
Pretty much all of the chains. In terms of apps, it's I would say predominantly the largest ones are Spark Protocol, MakerDAO, Morpho, and a few other ones that we haven't announced yet.
Okay, thank you. I think we are on time, right? Thank you so much, Niklas.